Salam everyone. So in this lecture, I'm going to take a look at, of course, after my research, I'm going to talk about the basic question, why to obey the messenger or Prophet Muhammad. The reason for this particular lecture is for many times, whether you're searching online, whether you're reading or just trying to find out the meaning of the Arabic words such as "Atiullah wa Rasul," which means obey God and obey the messenger. So typically, Muslims and other people, individuals all across the globe, they focus more heavily on the how part. Okay, in other words, how to obey the messenger. The real question is why you obey the messenger. Okay, and this is going to answer both how you should obey, and then of course the question put forth is why to obey the messenger. So in this lecture, I'm going to examine the phrase "Atiullah wa Rasul," and it appears several times in the Quran, which simply means obey God and obey the Prophet, okay, or the Rasul, the messenger. So here's the agenda. The first point that I'm just going to highlight, so from point 1 to 5, I'm just going to talk about this, and then in point 6, I have come up with about 70 reasons, okay, of why should we obey the messenger. So if you are a believer, if you believe in God, Quran, then of course you must believe in the Prophet and you must love the Prophet. And the reason why we should all love the Prophet is, of course, I've come up with these 70 points and all from the Quran. Okay? So because Quran is a complete guidance for mankind, it is a complete book. It has all the answers. Number 2, there is no inconsistency. God challenges, in fact, to bring forth any inconsistencies in the Quran. Now, there are many debates and many arguments about the harf and the haf, the Quran, the haf, and so on. But really, that's just the matter of, putting the, diacritical marks, for example. But apart from the actual language, the grammar, the text is completely in order. Quran challenges mankind. Point number 3, to bring forth certain surahs if they be truthful, right? So that's one of the falsification tests that the Quran offers. So bring forth such surahs, right? This is for the entire mankind. And the second falsification test, the Quran challenges mankind to find any inconsistency. Point number 4 is purpose of messengers and their message. So Prophet Muhammad, being the last prophet of God, is not the only prophet, right? Many prophets, God says in the Quran, came before him, and they offered and they brought forth the same message. So the message of all the messengers were the same. The only difference between the messengers is the fact that some messengers were given proofs, additional proofs from God, right, to show to their communities, and some weren't. Okay, so each prophet had his own life. So here I'm going to focus on life of Prophet Muhammad as per the Quran. Now, the books that are in addition to the Quran, in other words, other books that talk about the life of Prophet Muhammad, I've been through all of them. The very first book that you can actually, a written book, right? A document written book that talks about the life of Prophet Muhammad is by Ibn Ishaq. Okay. So, and that is in Arabic, but it has the English translation. So I'm going to provide a link so you can take a look at it yourself. It's a very small book, by the way. Okay. And most of it is just poetry, but it does talk about certain aspects of the life of Prophet Muhammad. He was one of the earlier writers. Okay. For that, there is no text available. So this is probably one of the first text that is available that talks about the life of Prophet Muhammad. But believe it or not, today, by the way, you'll see volumes and volumes on the life of the Prophet. So I'm not sure how it all expanded over the course of 1400 years. Why do we have a set of 40 volumes that talk about the life of the Prophet, whereas one of the earliest writers that you could research and come up with is Ibn Ishaq, and it's only a 100-page book. Okay, and that too doesn't talk all about Prophet Muhammad and so on. So again, it's a different topic. If you want to see the other video I've created, that why Prophet Muhammad did not write any hadiths or any writings, right, with his own hand, you're welcome to take a look at that video. And finally, why to obey the messenger? Why to love the messenger? In other words, what is so important about this gentleman? Okay, so we'll examine this in these 70 points as per the Quran, and this kind of walks you through the life of the Prophet himself as he grew up, or as he was given the revelation, because the Quran only talks about after the revelation fact, right? Of course, it doesn't talk about the childhood of the Prophet, but that's the important guidance for mankind, is what actually is the message of God. That's why God doesn't talk about his childhood in the Quran, for example, right? That we can find in other books. Great. So let's take a look at the first. I'm going to just walk through all these 70 statements, if you will, and each one of them is from the Quran. So if you need a reference, for example, here's point number 1. He was a normal person. He grew up in a community. If you need a reference from the Quran, I'll be happy to provide. Just put down in the comments below of which number that I'm going to talk about you need a reference for. I'll be happy to come up with the reference and research and give you that. But all of these are from the Quran, because I've taken all of these areas from the Quran alone. Great. And this kind of makes sense, because as I walk through these 70 points, you will see not only visualize the life of this particular man growing up in a community and what's happening with him and what it's actually doing, but also his character, right? What kind of person he was, his strengths, his weaknesses, right, as a human being, and so on. So it's absolutely fascinating. And once we're done with these 70 points, you'll notice the question will answer itself. Why to obey the messenger? Because he's a role model, okay? And why? Let's take a look at that. So the first point is he's a normal person. He grows up in a community because he was chosen from among the same. Second, he walks the streets and he goes shopping. So, or just like any one of us, you go out there and you do grocery shopping. He did the same thing. Point number 3. Now this person changed after revelation. So after he received his first revelation, people started to look at him differently. And that makes sense, because now he's talking different things. And that's what the change is. The change is not within his personality, or the change is not because he got ill, for example, right? That's not the case. It's just the change of his talk, for example, or his behavior, for example. Okay? And why this change? Of course, because he's getting this revelation. He's getting all the information that he needs to deliver the message to the community. So people started to call him sorcerer. Okay, hey, you're trying to manipulate us. You're trying to tell us leave all of this or whatever it is, right? So people started to dislike him, and that's true, because even today, if you see someone growing up in your own community and all of a sudden that person changes or starts to doing something different, you will of course start to question, right, or start to look at him, from a different viewpoint. Point number 4, his community started to disown him, and that's logical, because if you're a changed person, you're all of a sudden reciting the Quran to people. Community doesn't like that, and especially the Quran. We know that it's really about life after. Quran talks about the concept of heaven, the concept of hell, doing good deeds, doing righteous deeds. Just gives you those laws. So Prophet Muhammad started to deliver the message, started to deliver the laws of God. And of course, if the community is in sync with those laws, you'll be happy. But at the same time, if the law that the Prophet is delivering is not in sync with the community guidelines, rules, regulations, traditions, customs, guess what? You will disown that person. Point 5. So once he started to deliver God's message, he didn't ask anything in return. And this was strange too, because every single time you give something to someone, you want something in return, because otherwise you question that person. Why are you doing this? Okay, for example, we're all working, we're doing our jobs, and we're getting paid. And even, by the way, people who deliver lectures, they get paid. Okay, even today. So Prophet Muhammad is delivering God's message, but he's not asking anything in return from anyone. And that's great quality to have, by the way, because you're spending your time. You're spending your time delivering a message, and then at the same time, you're not earning anything out of it. You're not getting anything out of it. Who does that? Okay, so let's see if we're able to obey the messenger, right? And of course, the concept of charity, concept of doing good deeds is pretty synonymous with all of this, okay? Because we do good deeds, and if you don't want anything in return, that's great, okay? And you appreciate. But in this case, he's just delivering God's message without asking anything in return. Number 6, he doesn't do anything on his own except God's revelation. So he's not telling the same community that he actually grew up in anything different. He's just delivering God's message, whatever that is. And we know that the Quran talks about people being in prudent fear, for example, and so on. So all of these laws that are available, provided in the Quran, that's what he's reciting. So he's not doing anything on his own. He's not coming up with his own personal, laws. He doesn't have any personal vendetta against anyone. He's just delivering. He's not making things up, for example. So he's just delivering the message. Point number 7, great moral character. Azim, right? He's of great moral character. Now, of course, in order for you to talk to people, communicate to people, you need to have a strong character. People must like you, okay? But in this instance, people liked him when he was growing up, but all of a sudden things started to change and he started to deliver God's message. People started to dislike. But he maintained his moral character. Point number 8, on God's command, he even moved, right? Which is hijrah, right? Hijrah. So he moved. He had to move out of the city that he lived. And of course, with him, there are other believers who also moved out with him. And God says in the Quran, of course, that even if you have to leave your father, your wife, your family, you must leave, right? On God's command. So this was the instance where he had to leave and leave behind all of the loved ones, just because and for the cause of God. Point number 9, normal human. So we find in the Quran that sometimes he makes unlawful which God made lawful just to please wife. I believe it's Surah Tahrim. And that's normal too, because sometimes even today, if you're married, you would know, eat something that your wife gives you. Hey, eat it. Okay? It's good for you. I don't know if it's good for me or not, but that's the case. Okay? So this is in the Quran too, and that's normal human behavior. But in this case, what the Prophet did, he made something unlawful, which God actually made lawful. And the reason why he did that was to please wives. Point number 10, he was a shy person. He was not one of those people. He was just shy. And shy about what? Not shy in a sense where he's not willing to talk to people. He's not willing to introduce himself. He's shy to let people know something. Because the example given in the Quran is, I believe, Surah Al-Ahzab. When people visited his home, they usually sat after eating for hours. And that troubled Prophet Muhammad. But he was not able to tell these people to go home. Okay, now you've eaten, go home. So God says in the Quran that, oh people, your prophet is shy, telling you to go home. So you better go home. So do not sit around, linger around after you eat. Of course, this is something that is provided to us as guidance today when someone visits our homes, right? Be it family, be it friends, invite them to dinner or lunch. What happens? They just sit around, go on a rant, and waste time after eating, and so on, right? So, of course, we're being guided by the Quran and by the Messenger himself. Okay? This is the Prophet that we're talking about, that we must obey, right? So keep in mind that the question is why to obey the Messenger? Because he's doing something that God is instructing him to do. He's doing something that makes sense. He's doing something that is logical. Number 11, following Abraham's dictation. Millat Ibrahim Hanif. So this prophet, God told this prophet to follow Abraham's dictation. Now this is interesting because what dictation did Abraham give? Prophet Ibrahim, for example, he didn't have a book to follow. He didn't have any parchments or texts to look at, Prophet Ibrahim's guidance, right? Nothing. But God says in the Quran, follow Ibrahim's dictation. Now, at the same time, God also details out what Abraham did, okay, in several instances throughout the Quran. So, Prophet is now being bound, being ordered, being commanded by God to follow Abraham's dictation. And we know the stories of Abraham in the Quran. Great. Point number 12, reciting historical events. So the Prophet is constantly talking about history. The Quran is basically history to the Prophet himself, because if he's reciting, he's getting these revelations, right? So these revelations are primarily historical events, talking about Musa, for example, talking about Isa, for example, Yunus, Lut, and all these prophets. So this is primarily historical events that he's reciting. He's not coming up with these historical events. He's not reading any historical events from other places, even though he was criticized. But that's not the case. He's just delivering the message. Point number 13, he's not the father of anyone. The Quran says, "O Prophet, you're not the father of anyone." O believers, he's not the father of anyone, right? So, which means he's just a messenger. So don't make him a fatherly figure, right? That's the deal. He is just a messenger of God delivering the message. Because remember, the question is messenger or message, right? So message, of course, is important. So why to obey the messenger, right? Why love this gentleman, this person? Because God says, point number 14, God to cut his throat if he made anything up for God. This is amazing. Today, people talk about God like it's nothing, okay? And here's God telling the prophet that he's going to cut his throat if he made anything up for God. He's not allowed to come up anything except what is being given to him to deliver to the community. That's a pretty strong statement from God. So why should we obey the messenger? How should we obey the messenger? We should do all of these points that actually are in the Quran, talking about the prophet, what the prophet is delivering. We must do, of course, the same. This is guidance. We cannot make anything up for God. Also, point number 15, brave person with leadership skills. Yes, he fought many wars, a leader of his followers, the believers, okay? And he was brave. He was not afraid of fighting for the cause of God, right? He was not afraid of protecting himself. And most times it was just protection from other people, not fighting, right? The Quran never says he initiated the fight. He was actually protecting himself from the idol worshippers, from the other groups that the Quran mentions, be it the Nazarenes, be it the Jews or other individual communities. Okay, so and he's brave. He's facing all these fears. He's facing all the hits that he's getting from the community. Point number 16, normal person. What's normal about him? He frowned and turned away because of a blind person, because he pays attention to the rich folks. This is Surah Mujadala. He's a normal person. He's having conversation with the rich, with the rich sitting, right? Of course, just like today people sit, when you're talking to a person who has a high status in the society, for example, or who has a lot of money, you would pay more attention to that person. That's natural. And all of a sudden, a poor guy comes to you and walks up to you, you may just frown a little bit. Okay, wait, guy, I'm going to talk to you later. Okay, that's what the prophet did, and of course, God later on clarified that prophet. You never know whether this blind person is even more keen towards learning or more keen towards obtaining prudent fear. Right. Point number 17. God may give him Makame Mahmud. So God promises him, right? Now God is telling this prophet, I may give you Makame Mahmud, higher level. Okay? So what he needs to do is continue delivering God's message, continue following God's guidance, and in return, he's going to get this status. Point number 18, normal person once again. He got frustrated because his chest Saba, right? The chest area is becoming, he's getting frustrated because he's delivering the message to people and he's not getting any response. The only response he's getting is from the very few. The majority of the community members reject him. Don't listen, do not want to listen to this prophet. Point number 19, protecting, leaning, and kind towards believers. Okay, so one of the qualities of Prophet Muhammad is that he's always protecting of the believer. And God says, make sure that you lean and be kind towards believers. Point number 20, he's always advocating modesty. And we see this in Surah Azab and other Surah An-Nisa also, that he's talking about being modest for both. Again, for men, women, right? God talks about modesty for both. Be it a man, be it a woman, right? And that makes sense because as a normal person, you want to be modest. You don't want to be a show off, right? And that's why we say if someone is showing off, you say, hey, you show off, right? So, the prophet is being, told by God to be modest, and that's what he's advocating. Point number 21, he makes pardon, istighfar, and forgives people. So he's kind, he's gentle, okay? That's one of the qualities. That's why we need to obey the messenger, Ati or Rasul, because all of these qualities so far, point 1 to point 21, right? All of this information is in the Quran. Fascinating. You can do all of these. Point number 22. He maintains and upholds his duty steadfastly from dusk till nightfall. He's constantly being God conscious, right? The moment he wakes up until he goes to sleep. And he maintains like his salah, salah, right? That's what we are also ordered to do. We need to make sure that we pray. We maintain our duties. Point number 23, sound reasoning and judgment. So this Prophet Muhammad, always reasons. Because God in the Quran says, Afala ta'qilun. People don't reason. Do they not reason? Okay. But Prophet Muhammad is always reasoning because he learns from other prophets stories that are in the Quran. Dawood, David, right? Solomon, Sulaiman. And we have several judgments in the Quran that God has given to read and to take a look at how these other prophets made their reasoning and judgments and how they erred in reasoning and judgments as well. So Prophet Muhammad is learning from, of course, the historical events that are narrated in the Quran. And otherwise, as a person also. Point 24, he's stern with people who do not heed warning. That's what God tells him. O Prophet, make sure you stay very strict with individuals who are not heeding warning. And this is also amazing because if you tell someone that you are delivering God's message and the other person doesn't want to listen, you want to be stern with that person, trust me, you're not going to last long. People are not going to like, and that's Prophet Muhammad. Point number 25, normal person. Once again, that's his not being a normal person. What did he do? God says in Surah Al-Munafiqun, he likes well-dressed people, people who look good, people who speak well. God says when these munafiqeen, right, hypocrites, they come to you, O Prophet, then, they bear witness that you are the Prophet of God. And God says, I know he's a Prophet of God. And when they come to you, you like their speech, you like how they dress, you like how they look. But, O Prophet, these are all liars. So, again, as a normal person, you like someone who's well dressed, you like someone who looks good, you like someone who speaks well. So, constantly, Prophet Muhammad is being taught at the same time in the Quran by God, right? Point number 26, he's a role model, just like Prophet Abraham was the role model. Believers are role models, and Prophet Muhammad is also a role model. It's funny because, not funny, but it's different because Muslims today only, talk about Prophet Muhammad as being the role model. Uswatu Hasana. He's not the only role model. The Quran has the same verse for Prophet Abraham, same verse for believers. They're all role models. Point number 27, always shows patience. Show patience, right? Because Prophet Muhammad, even though he's being frustrated, even though he's being disliked, right? He's showing patience. He's not reacting. That's a great quality to have. Guess what? Should we try being patient? If someone is, yelling at us, for example, or someone is not liking us for any reason whatsoever, and here the prophet is just delivering God's message, and people don't want to listen. They don't like him anymore, except those few believers. So he's showing patience. Point 28, strong faith. He believed in the Quran. He believed, he accepted God's covenant, accepted God's promise, deliver the message. So that's part of faith, because he's not given any proofs to show it to people, just like Jesus was given, for example, or Moses was given, for example. The only miracle, right, or the proof that is given is the Quran itself. And that's why Quran says it's a complete book. It has no inconsistency at all. And that's a pretty strong thing to have to hold on to for about 1400 years, and no one has come up with any surahs similar to the Quran. Point number 29, God conscience is always in taqwa, is always being in prudent fear. It's always thinking about God's laws, message before delivering the same. Point number 30, he's not interested in worldly things. For example, he's not interested in these mansions, for example, right? And that's the Quran talks about, where Prophet told his wives to take, if they are interested in these worldly mansions or these houses, then they should take, but leave him, because that's not what he wants to do. And this is in reference to a war being won where they didn't have to fight and they obtained a lot of the assets. Okay, the believers. Point number 31, debates and argument, because in one instance, Prophet tells people to bring forth the Torah if they be truthful, because the debate was the fact that whatever is haram, what is halal. So Prophet says, hey, go bring Torah. And you'll be surprised that Muslims today, they don't even know what Torah is. They've never looked at Torah itself. Torah, that's what the Quran says. And the reason why, because scholars today, or Maulanas, or scholars, Muslim scholars, they say Torah has been changed. And that's fine. That doesn't mean that we cannot look at it, we cannot read it, whether it's the Old Testament or the New Testament or any other book. The Prophet is actually debating in the Quran. He's debating with people, Jews, to bring the Torah and read the Torah. And here you are, you're saying you're not allowed to read the Torah anymore. All right, point 32, debates about Jesus, about Prophet Isa ibn Maryam. He's actually debating, the Nazarenes about Jesus, the concept of Trinity and not being the Son of God, right? So that's the entire debate is also in the Quran. Now, who does this, by the way? What kind of qualities are we looking at here? Just kind of go through this. Why should we not obey the messenger? We must obey the messenger, because this person is just fantastic, right? He's debating. He's a debater. He can argue, do arguments. Logical. He reasons things. He's patient, normal human person. He's brave, right? All of these qualities. That's how we are to be your Rasul. We must obey the messenger. That's why God says, obey him. Now, obeying, in my humble opinion, doesn't mean that we should wear what he used to wear. That's not obeying. Obeying means be like him. That's what we need to do. And by the way, people today, Muslims, say that he's ummi, right? Which means he was ignorant. He was not a learner individual. From the looks of this so far, by the way, according to the Quran, Prophet seems to be a fairly logical, reasoned debater, do arguments, talk to people. It says in the Quran, O Prophet, Qul hatu burhanakum, bring forth your evidence. He's asking for evidence from people. He's not just closing his eyes and running around. Point number 33, he doesn't know the future. And it's interesting because Quran says, and multiple instances, Prophet himself says in multiple instances in the Quran, I don't know the future. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I don't know what's going to happen to you. And that's in the Quran. People are asking the Prophet, like yasalunaka al-anfal, yasalunaka, they're asking all these questions. Yasalunaka ruh, what is this soul? What is this extra? Anfal means something extra, the actual war. So people ask questions, and when they ask question about Day of Judgment, when is it coming? What's going to happen? The same reply in several instances in the Quran. I don't know. That's what the Prophet says. And he's always reciting historical events, and I mentioned this earlier too, because the Quran is full of historical events. So history is important. Okay, in one aspect, history is important because we learn from history. Point number 34, he serves God alone. And this is important because, see, Prophet Muhammad served God alone. He was not part of any sect. There was no sect at that point in time. There was no Sunnis, there was no Shias, there was no Brahmins, there was no Hanafis, there was nothing. No Hanbali, nothing. So he served just God alone. In other words, God's message. In other words, that is the Quran. We should obey the messenger. We must obey the messenger if we are believers. So what is Rasul doing here? He's serving God alone. He's not belonging to any sect. He has not announced any sect for himself and the believers either, right? So why do people today have different sects? Well, something to think about. Point number 35. He's barred from going to mosque where God alone name is not taken. So God is actually told the Prophet that you will not stand in that mosque where God's name is not taken. 36. He's barred from visiting graves of hypocrites. So God is even telling the Prophet not to go on the graves of hypocrites. And we know hypocrites because these are those people who say one thing and do something else, right? Straightforward. Point number 37. Prophet Muhammad is not ignorant. Okay? Ummiyin, the Arabic word, means coming out of mother's womb. Okay, that's the connotation. That doesn't mean he's ignorant. He was not ignorant. He's always asking God what? Qul Rabbi zidni ilma. Right? He's always asking God to increase him in knowledge. So he's learning. He's looking at Torah. He's talking to people. He's otherwise a learned individual. And yes, in my humble opinion, if he can debate, he can argument, he can tell people to bring Torah. Yes, he can write, he can read. Okay, that's common sense. Point number 38. Stays away from jahil or ignorant people and lead with dignity. That's important too because you need to obey the messenger, right? Your Rasul. You need to do the same thing. Stay away from ignorant people, people who do not have any sources, people who do not have any substance, people who enter into a discussion, debate, argument without any evidence, and they're just talking out of their mouths. Stay away from these people. Rather leave with dignity. These are, by the way, also in reference to Ibadur Rahman, people who are slave, Rahman slave. There's a whole list of those. I'm going to cover this maybe in. So Prophet Muhammad does the same. He stays away from ignorant people. Now, if he was not a learned individual, and if he was an ignorant person, where does that leave him, right? So again, that defeats the theory that the Prophet was ignorant. Point number 31, keeps his voice low. Okay, and that's an important quality, trait, character, right? No yelling. And Quran gives examples of a donkey, right? People, do not raise your voice just like donkey's voice. So that's an example in the Quran. So Prophet, being of high moral character, he's maintaining a low voice, right? He's not fighting with people. He's even though he's debating, he's doing arguments, but he's doing it in a logical manner, not yelling, fighting. And that's why we must obey the messenger too. In our talks, in our discussion, in our debates, let's not, get personal. It's okay. We must not raise our voices. We must make our points come across fine. Point number 40. He's made fun of constantly. So people are making constant fun of this prophet because he's a changed person. He's delivering God's message and people don't like it. 41. He takes care of orphans and adopts them. So here's the prophet. He's interested in orphans. And how many of us are interested in orphans? Adopt them. Takes care of these orphans. 42. He's a normal person once again. Because wife of his stepson, that's a story in the Quran, because his stepson, Zaid, that's the name mentioned in the Quran by name, right? That he adopts. Prophet Muhammad likes his wife. Once he divorces his wife, Prophet marries his stepson's wife. So the point here is that being a normal person, it's okay to like someone. It's okay to have feelings. But at the same time, it's important not to commit any sexual immoralities. Okay? Make sure you follow God's laws. There's a methodology of doing something. If someone, let's say, is divorced, sure, you can marry that person. 43, righteous deeds. And there's a whole list of these righteous deeds all across the Quran, but the main ones are helps the needy, conducts charity. That's a good quality to have. And why to obey the messenger? That's why we must obey the messenger. We must do all of these things. 44, do not use nicknames. Use real names. So today, people just use nicknames, especially in the Muslim world. Every single person has a nickname, by the way, at least what I come across. So do not use nicknames. Use real names. If a person's name is John, then just say, hey, John, right? For example. Or if the person's name is Tariq, you say, hey, Tariq. So again, use real names. That's the Prophet using real names, by the way. Okay. Point number 45, always humble. Being always humble, down to earth. Okay. Do not be one of those people who are boasting all the time. Just be humble. That's the Prophet. So if you want to obey the Prophet, you like to stay humble all the time. No yelling, no shouting, right? Just have a good moral character. Point number 46, use logical reasoning, common sense. The Arabic word is aql. I made a video of this aql. You can look that up also. So the Prophet is using logical reasoning, just like Abraham used logical reasoning when he destroyed all these idols and he left the big one, and all the smaller idols were destroyed, and then people came running to him, and then people asked him who did all this, and Abraham said, well, this big guy, this big idol, ask him. And people were like, well, how can we ask a stone, right? So this is logical reasoning, it's common sense. So Prophet Muhammad also uses that. Point number 47, why to obey the messenger and why to love this person. He's going through so much. He's such a fantastic character, moral character, strong character. He will complain to God. Okay, so this is point 47. This is important. I believe it's Surah Furqan. At the day of judgment, Prophet Muhammad is going to complain to God. He didn't complain to God during his tenure of delivering the message, but the Quran says in Surah Furqan, he will complain to God. And what is he going to say? قَالَ رَبِّ إِنَّ قَوْمِي إِنِّي قَوْمِي اتَّخَذُوا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ مَحْجُورًا. This is what he's going to say. My people abandoned the Quran. This is fascinating. I mean, come on. The Prophet Muhammad is delivering the message to the community, right? People are rejecting him so far that we get the sense out of the life of the Prophet as per the Quran, right? And then here, Prophet is also going to say, these people abandoned the Quran. People have left the Quran. People are after other books, not the Quran alone. That's the Prophet. So how many Muslims, this is my question by the way, post in the comment area. How many of you actually know this? That the Prophet is actually going to complain to God. Point number 48, keeps his promise to God and people. So he doesn't break his promises. He shuns idols and anything that associates as partner with God. So he doesn't want to relate anything to God. Point number 50, complete trust in God. Tawakkal Allah, right? So always believing and trusting God alone, not going to other individuals and trusting other. Point number 51, consultative approach to decisions and makes just, equitable decisions. And that's a good quality, good trait to have. You always want to have decision structure or people that are part of your decision-making strategy. Consult skilled individuals because every person is skilled in some respect. You cannot know everything, you cannot be it and all, right? So there are individuals who have different skill sets. So this consultation gives you that ability to attract other skill sets to make effective decisions and make just decisions. This is the quality of the Prophet. This is what the Prophet is doing. And this is why we should obey the messenger. Point number 52, provides evidence to support claim. Again, Prophet is not talking out of his head. He's providing evidence. For example, people say, why should we follow the Quran? Well, all right, go find any inconsistent in the book or bring forth such surahs. You can, then do not follow the Quran. So that's the evidence. That's the logic claim. So Prophet is always providing evidence to support the claims. 53, verifies all reports and news because God says in the Quran, if any person brings any news, make sure you verify it. And that's a good thing to have. Today, when we call someone, we talk to people and we say, well, hey, I heard this, right? And what do? You say, oh, yeah, that's great. Must be true. Well, verify it. You must verify the reports as much as you can. Point number 54, if two groups of believers get into a fight, you're going to make things right. That's what the Prophet is doing. So today people are fighting. We are actually promoting more fights. Look at people on the streets all across the world or anywhere. So instead of making things right, we are actually, there are many people who actually promote fight. So here's the Prophet who's making things right. And we must obey the messenger. We also must make things right. Point number 55, do not ridicule. The Prophet does not ridicule anyone. He respects everyone. He respects all races. He respects all different kinds of people. Do not speak ill of yourself. By the way, this is Surah Al-Hujurat, and I've specifically mentioned this. Prophet says that do not speak ill of yourself. Do not consider yourself as a lowly person, as I'm nothing. Okay, that's not the case. Every single person has a skill set given by nature, given by God. Do not spy. You want to obey the messenger, guys? Do not spy. It's okay. You like to obey the messenger? Do not make slander or libel. Do not do this. That's really what the messenger is actually doing himself. He's not making fun of anyone. He's not speaking ill of anyone or himself. He's not spying. He's not slander. So why should we obey the messenger? These are the reasons, right, so far. Point number 56. God says, purify thou thy garments. Straightforward. Point number 57. Not part of any sect. And I've covered this before. Prophet was not part of any sect. So if someone says, I'm a Hanafi, I'm a Sunni, I'm a Shia, or I'm any group, right? I'm a Protestant, I'm Catholic. Well, that's none of this existed at the time when the Prophet is reciting these verses. Even if you go back to other books of God, Torah, or other readings, you'll find the same stance. There are no sects. 158 doesn't make excuses. So here's the Prophet. There's a wartime, there's a war going on, for example, and he did fight wars. People were killed in wars. They collected a lot of war booty also, and so on, multiple instances. And all of this was in protection, by the way. So he doesn't make any excuses. He doesn't say, well, God, I'm not going to go because I have family in the houses, because that's what the munafiqeen, that's what the hypocrites did. They told the Prophet says, all right, let's get ready, protect ourselves. And they said, well, we don't want to go. We don't, we're weak. I'm ill, right? I have kids at home. So all these are excuses. Point number 59, why to obey the messenger? Why to love the messenger? He's not a guardian of anyone. He's not a vakil, okay? For example, that's the Arabic word. So he's not the advocate of anyone. He's not a guardian. God is the guardian. Point number 60, good conduct towards parents and lower wing of gentleness. That's what we're told regarding parents. Always do good with your parents. Always be kind towards parents, because these parents are those individuals who spend, their lives raising children. They raise you from being infancy, right, where you cannot do anything on your own. So when you grow old, when you grow bigger, you must be kind and have good conduct towards parents. And lower wing of gentleness. That means take care of them. It's part of your duty. That's part of your salah. That's what the Prophet is doing. So if you want to obey the messenger, then of course we must do all of it. Point number 62, give to relatives, give to needy, wayfarer, their due. So if you have relatives who are in need, if you have relatives who are, who you can help, if there are other needy individuals who you can help, maybe just a wayfarer passing by. If you see a need, help them. That's the messenger helping all these individuals. Point number 63, squander thou not in extravagance. In other words, waste in foolish manner, right? So God has given you wealth. If God has given you a lot of things, for example, do not waste anything in foolish manner, and also not in extravagance. Let's not show off, right? Remember, humbleness. So it's always, Prophet is not in extravagance. In other words, he doesn't have this huge caravan, right? He's not doing any of this. So if you want to obey the messenger, keep this in mind. Point number 64, fulfill the measure when you measure. So this is again business. If you want to measure something, make sure it's equal. 65, follow thou not that whereof thou hast no knowledge. This is amazing. So Prophet is being told, and what he's actually doing, he's not saying something that he doesn't know. In other words, if he doesn't have any knowledge, he's not going to say it to someone. He must have a source before he says something. And here Muslims believe that he's ignorant. He doesn't know. He cannot read and write. Fascinating. Of course he is knowledgeable. But he's not saying anything that he has no knowledge of. Okay? He's only talking about whatever he has knowledge of. So God says, follow thou not that whereof thou hast no knowledge. Point number 66, walk not on earth conceitedly. Do not boast, do not show off, do not walk, be humble. So that's what the prophet is. You must obey the messenger. I mean, who can do all of these points, by the way? There are only a few left. Point number 67, turn away from vain speech. So if you see someone talking out of his mind, right, for example, vain speech, totally absolute, bogus speech, turn away. That's what the messenger does. And finally, the last 3 points. Point number 68, did not invent anything above God's words. So prophet has not invented anything. Yaftarun, people invent things. Prophet is not or has not invented anything during his lifetime, during the time that he delivered the message. That's why we don't have anything, any book, any text, any parchment from the prophet himself, because he has not created anything. In other words, there were no customs that he created. There were no traditions that he created. There was nothing of this sort except deliver God's message. Point number 69, not a fault finder. Prophet is not finding faults in anyone. He's appreciating people. He's helping people. He's respecting people. So if you want to obey the messenger, let's do this. And here we are, people at large or many individuals, they always find faults in other individuals. And last point, and there are many others, by the way, so I may come up with a part 2 of this, but right now I just want to come with 70 points. So the last point in today's lecture is, woe unfair traders. Surah Al-Mutaffifin. Prophet Muhammad, of course, was not one of them. When he traded as a business person, for example, or otherwise in his life, he was fair. He never cheated anyone. So these are the 70 points why obey the messenger. Ati'u Rasul. Of course, Ati'ullaha wa Rasul. Obey God and obey messenger. And these are the reasons, by the way, so far. And there are many others, but I've compiled these 70 reasons so far. And once again, if you need to know the references for any of these verses, just comment below. I'll be happy to provide you those references so you can actually read yourself and take a look at those. But imagine all these 70 points. If you were to follow these 70 points, you're obeying the messenger. And if you obey the messenger, you will have a great moral character. You'll have all of these qualities in you. You will not raise your voice. You'll be a good debater. You will talk nice. You will not do any spying, slander, libel, none of these stuff. You'll always be fair. You'll be helping people, right? That's the messenger. That's the life. Even though the messenger has been kicked out of his home, he had to move. He has to fight with people in protection. Okay, all the brave person. So a few notes here, just for myself here, that the prophet did not write anything within his lifetime, and that makes sense because the reason why he didn't write with his own hands and give us a handout or a booklet is because people would go crazy with that part. His job was to deliver God's message. His job was not to write anything and tell people otherwise. Okay, you cannot invent anything above God's word. And one of the notes that I have, just a thought here, that Muslims today name their children. They're all Bani Israel names. They're all Jewish-based names. Musa, Ibrahim, these are Bani Israel. And yet, for some reason, unknown reason, I don't maybe understand why are we fighting with these other individuals all the time. That's not what the Prophet is doing. Prophet is actually residing. He is a resident of a community which has Jews, which has Christians, which has Nazarenes, right? All kinds of idol worshippers. He's part of that community, and he is actually delivering God's message, being in the same. Here we are as Muslims, for example, at large. We don't want to do anything with any other individual or any other community. So again, I hope this helps. Just wanted to cover 70 points why to obey the messenger. Of course, watiullah, Rasul, why obey Allah and why obey the messenger. I hope this helped. If you like, make sure you give it a like, make sure you subscribe, and of course, comment down below if you need to know any of these verses with this. Assalamu alaikum.